The short version, the really short one-slide version of the role of open educational resources in personal learning is that open educational resources are the words that people use in a dialogue or conversation that constitutes personal learning. And the meta discussion was raised a little bit yesterday, and it is raised almost any time people talk about open educational resources, or that is to say, learning resources that are produced to provide access to learning materials for free for people. And that's the conundrum of open educational resources, having to do with who produces them and who uses them. We produce hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of these open educational resources, but there is very little reuse. There's very little sharing. And so it raises the question of the sustainability. It raises the question of, indeed, the sense of the whole enterprise. Why would we even bother doing this in the first place? It doesn't make sense to produce resources that nobody uses, right? So that's the background and the context that I want to be thinking of as I say, as a meta message. Now, people can define personal learning in different ways, and I'm not really a definition person. But for the perspective, or for the purposes of this discussion, we'll think of personal learning thought of as learning from the perspective of the learner, not from the perspective of the institutions. The product of personal learning is not learning, properly so called. The product is the learner, him or herself. The product, the outcome, the desired end state is some form of individual growth, individual development. Now, usually we talk about learning in terms of skills or capacities, but I prefer in this context, and in the context of knowledge and learning generally, to talk about it being more like literacy, more like a capacity to work in, to listen, to converse, to dialogue in a language. Now, personal learning, thought of this way and thought of technologically, is best thought of as an ecology in which this learning, in which this growth and development takes place. The most common way, this first way of representing connective knowledge, is to say that knowledge, connective knowledge, is the knowledge that is created and shared by an interconnecting community of learners. This is the idea, when people say, I store my knowledge in my friends and things like that. This is that idea. This is the knowledge of a society, the knowledge of a community of people. This knowledge is created by the people in that community communicating back and forth. Each person in that community possesses a bit of that knowledge, and therefore we say that the knowledge possessed by the community is distributed. It's not all in one person. There's a little bit here, there's a little bit here, there's a little bit here, and so on. And as I say, it's created by conversation and interaction. I'm going to want to talk a little bit more about that. The role of the learner in this kind of ecology, and I'll add, because I don't have a separate slide that says the role of the teacher, because I'm talking about personal learning, non-institutional, etc. The role of the teacher is basically the same as the role of the learner. And the role of the learner in this community is to participate and engage in that community. If you look at these communities, look at any of these communities of practice, quote unquote, you find that the rank beginners don't just sit there and watch things. They jump in and try things, and that's what they should do. And they should do it because they don't even, in my opinion, understand the relevance of what is said or inferred or suggested or done by the expert until they've tried it their own way and begin to see the relevance of that. It's kind of like playing darts. I play darts a lot. And you don't learn to play darts by watching darts on TV. You just don't. And in fact, nobody does. You don't actually watch darts on TV. Well, most people don't watch it at all, right? That's why it's hardly ever on. But you don't watch darts on TV until you've started playing darts. And once you've started playing darts, then you realize the sort of things that you're looking for when you're watching darts. So you don't participate in these communities very gradually from the outside. You jump in full feet first, and make a big splash, and then you discover why that was wrong. Anyhow, I could go on about this, but mainly what I want to say here is that the role of the learner is to participate and engage in this community, to jump in. There's no rules, there's no best way of doing it. Really, it's going to vary according to the individual. There's nothing wrong with being a lurker. There's nothing good about being a lurker. It's different people, different circumstances, different needs. What pedagogical purpose is served by open sharing as opposed to publishing a book, producing a video, or whatever? And the answer I am going to argue here, and this is the core or the essence, if you will, of my talk, lies in the nature of knowledge and learning itself. I want you to think, and I'm using the word science here. I don't have to use the word science. I could use the word discipline more broadly. Any area of human endeavor, any subject. I'll say science because in the end they're all kind of like sciences. I guess that's kind of a scientific-centered point of view, but you know what I mean. The traditional view, and again, this could be physics, this could be chemistry, this could be drama, this could be art, whatever, right? Is that science and knowledge is a set of propositions, a set of facts and principles that describe the nature of the world. And then learning the science, becoming knowledgeable, becoming expert in this science, would be remembering this body of facts and principles. Now, when we look at scientists themselves, scientists don't actually do this. And you look at scientists that are some of the most forgetful people on the planet. It's not a coincidence that we have this stereotype of the absent-minded professor. Remembering things really isn't a very good way to go about learning a science. First of all, I don't even have the point on the diagram. First, there's too much to remember. Even simple sciences like physics or chemistry, where the body of knowledge is pretty well defined and pretty well known, is almost too overwhelming for any individual to absorb and to learn. But even were it possible for them to do that, the second problem is the facts and the principles of sciences, even the essential sciences, are not static. They're not unchanging. They're constantly changing. Things as coarse as, the definition of a planet to our understanding of the fundamental nature of the universe and the rest. These are all changing. If you're in something that isn't as concrete as physics or chemistry in, say, sociology or education or any of these other disciplines, economics, knowledge is changing almost day to day, week to week. The model, I think, is most accurate in describing what science actually is, and therefore what knowledge and a discipline actually is a conversation. And I mean that pretty literally. I say pretty literally because I mean it a little bit metaphorically, but mostly literally. And there are two kinds of conversations that happen. The first conversation, I really want to think of this as a conversation with a syntax or mechanisms or methods or rules or processes of having the conversation, along with the semantics and the pragmatics and all the rest of the attributes we might think of in a language. So the first one is the conversation scientists have with their body of inquiry. Because it's not simply, you do an experiment, you observe the result, you write something down, that's science. Because that's a very structured, static, one-dimensional kind of science. This kind of science that I'm talking about is where it's almost like science is play, where you go in and you start messing around with the domain. And in that messing around with the domain, you kind of get an understanding of how that domain works. And it's this kind of getting of this understanding that eventually leads you to come out with some kind of sentence that seems sort of to characterize what it is that you've seen. The second type of connective knowledge, the less common way of representing knowledge, and that's personal knowledge. The way a person who is one of these scientists, who is literate, is constructed. And the way they are constructed's a bad word because it implies that somebody constructed, but is shaped physically. Even shaped is a bad word. I don't mean it in the teleological sense. What I mean here is that this person, this scientist who has the capacity to communicate in this language, has this capacity by virtue of the connections that have been formed, the patterns that have been formed in the neurons in his mind, in his brain. And the meta message, remember, was a message about who produces open educational resources and who uses open educational resources. And in the end, in the final analysis, we cannot produce knowledge for people, period. The people who are benefiting from these open education resource initiatives are the people who are producing these resources. And it's kind of ironic, the person benefiting the most from this discussion that we're having is me. I'm getting all the results from this because I'm the one who's talking, creating, stimulating, forming connections